Hello and happy Hanukkah. Leadership. Who is appropriate to be a leader? What are the character traits of a true leader in Am Yisrael? Something that we really do need to pay attention to, especially in this day and age. But I'm not going to go into politics. I'm going to go into biblical interpretation. Jacob, the patriarch, has to choose who's going to be the king. At the end of his life, at the end of the book of Bereshit, he will select one of the brothers to be the ancestor of the king, and the other brother not. Who are the brothers that he has to choose from? Yehudah and Yosef. Judah and Joseph. He chooses Judah and not Joseph, and that's a surprising choice. Because Joseph, first of all, proves in this coming week's Parsha what a great leader he is. And Judah shows that he fails time and time again. He fails, first of all, by being the one to suggest selling Joseph into slavery. He fails by being involved in the deception of their father by dipping Joseph's coat in blood and showing it to him, misleading Yaakov to think that Joseph has been killed. He fails by going down to marry a Canaanite woman, which is against the advice of the patriarchs. And then he fails with the levirate marriage situation involving his three sons, and his daughter-in-law. What's that about? We'll focus on that for a moment. There is a brother, the oldest brother is Er. He marries a woman named Tamar. Tamar, interestingly enough, the rabbis say is the daughter of Shem, the son of Noah. Very interesting. And Er dies before he has any children, before he has any heirs with Tamar. That only works in English. And then Onan, so she is by levirate marriage required to marry the brother. This was a biblical practice, that when a man died without any children, his wife marries the brother in order to keep the family name going. So Tamar dutifully marries Onan, who also dies before they have children. And now there's another brother left, Shelah. And Judah says, wait a second, this woman Tamar, she seems to be fairly lethal. Both boys died when they were married to her. I'm not going to give her to Shelah, but he doesn't tell Tamar that. He just lets her wait in perpetuity. So there he messes up with that too. And then finally he will mess up because Tamar has had enough. She dresses up in a way that makes it seem like she is a prostitute, and she goes to where she knows Judah is going to be with the flocks. Judah's wife has just passed away, and so Judah is tempted. He sees a woman dressed up as a prostitute, and he goes and he has a relationship with her. So he's messing up left and right. Joseph, on the other hand, had been tempted by a woman also in the form of Potiphar's wife, the minister from whom to whom he had been sold as a slave, and yet Joseph does not commit a sin. And actually I noticed a parallel in these two stories, I should say a contrast in these two stories, that they both involve a personal effect. Judah, when he finishes with Tamar, he has nothing to pay her with, and she says, well then give me some personal items as a guarantee. So he gives her a ring, his staff, and a patil, which is some kind of a thread or a string, I'm not sure what that is, and he gives that to her after he has, in his mind, sinned with her. And Joseph also involves leaving a personal effect with Potiphar's wife, his garment, which he leaves in her hands as he flees to avoid sinning. So Judah leaves something after he has committed a sin, at least in his mind, and Joseph flees after having not committed a sin, after having withstood the temptation. So Judah has a lot of strikes against him, yet he is the one who is chosen to be the future leader, that his descendants will be the kings of Israel through the lineage of King David and so forth until the time of the Mashiach. That's remarkable. Why not Joseph? Why yes Judah? I believe the answer is 2 words and 2 words. What are these words? Let's dig in a little deeper here. I noticed a theme. In the book of Genesis, certainly the main theme is brothers not succeeding in getting along with each other. The enmity of Esav towards Yaakov fuels a few parshas, and the story of Joseph and his brothers fuels a few more parshas, and before that we have Cain and Hevel, and to a lesser degree Yitzchak and Yishmael. But there's another theme, and that is garments, clothing, costumes, if you will, used to deceive. That starts with Yaakov, who dresses up as his brother Esav in order to deceive his father Yitzchak and to get the blessing that Yitzchak had intended to give to Esav. And then it continues after Yaakov gives Joseph the coat of stripes, the amazing Technicolor dream coat, to use the Broadway terminology. So then the brothers, at the behest apparently of Yehudah, take that coat again to deceive their father. After they have sold Joseph into slavery, they take the coat, they dip it in an animal's blood, and then they present it to Yaakov and they say, Hakerna, do you recognize this coat? They are misleading him. He sees the blood and he says, Joseph must have been torn to bits. He is no longer, and he begins a long period of sadness and mourning for his son, who he believes to be deceased. So there you have the second time of a deception through garments. And the third time then is when Yehuda sees Tamar, who is dressed up as a prostitute. So she will deceive him into thinking she is someone who she is not. Deception through garments. These are a theme. The answer to the fixing of all of this comes through Tamar herself. Who is Tamar? Who is this woman who married Onan and was supposed to marry Shelah and then took the law into her own hands and seduced Yehuda to be with her and thus performing the levirate marriage with the father, which in those days was fine, and therefore keeping the lineage of the Messiah intact or bringing it into being? Who was this Tamar? The rabbis say she was the son of Shem, the son of Noach. She was the son. She was the daughter of Shem, the son of Noach. Lest you think that means she was really old. Not necessarily. Shem lived 500 years after the flood. If you do the math, it turns out that when Shem died, Yaakov was 50 years old. So Yehuda was already alive. So it's possible that Shem had her later in his life. But I do believe that it may not necessarily mean literally that she is the daughter of Shem, but rather she is the spiritual daughter of Shem, maybe a more distant descendant. How so? Because Tamar represents truth. She represents honesty and responsibility. Truth and responsibility go together. When one is aware of the truth, then one will take responsibility. And I think this is hinted at in the three sons of Noach. There was Cham, which means hot or warm. There was Shem, which means name, and there was Yafet, which means beauty, Yofi. Those three names are very significant. A human being has an inside and an outside. A righteous person is someone who's inside and outside. Their inner feelings and thoughts and dreams and desires and their outward actions towards the rest of humanity are both on a level of righteousness. This is a tzaddik. Tocho kibaro. Their inside is like their outside. Some people, though, are inside one way and outside another. Some people may be very, very spiritual and emotional inside, but outside they may be ill-mannered and behave poorly. Cham was one of those, because the word chom, heat or feeling, is something which is internal, which is not manifested externally. Cham has very little self-control. His emotions rule him, so his inside takes control of his outside. Yafet, on the other hand, beauty, is something that is external, and it is especially relevant to this holiday of Hanukkah because the Greeks are considered the descendants of Yafet. They have an external sense of the aesthetic. Their culture is very beautiful, very appealing, but internally it is morally rotten, as were the Hellenists. And they sought to seduce our people away from the Torah, and they had some success because people were attracted to the external beauty. So the inside there was corrupt, the outside was beautiful. But the word Shem, or name, implies both the inside and the outside. A name is the essence of a person. There are many stories in the rabbis, one about a certain group of rabbis that come to an innkeeper to spend the Shabbat. And one of the rabbis asks the innkeeper, "What's your name?" to sort of get a judge of his character, because they had to decide an important thing. Do we leave our wallets with the guy for Shabbat? Will they be safe, or will this guy steal them? And this rabbi, Rabbi Meir, asks him his name, and the man says, "My name is Kedor." And Rabbi Meir says, we see from here, he's an evil guy, he's untrustworthy. He brings a verse from Ha'azinu, Kedor tahapuchot hem Elohimun bam. They are a generation of rebelliousness. There is no trust in them. And since the guy's name was Kedor, it reminded Rabbi Meir of that pasuk, Kedor, because they are a generation. And it says that you can't trust them. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't give his wallet. And of course, this guy steals the other rabbis' wallets. There you go. So shame is both inside and outside. It represents truth. And so now we'll come to the two words that stop this chain of deception by garments in its tracks. The words are hakerna, do you recognize, or recognize, please? Yehuda had said those words with the brothers to their father to deceive. He had said to their father, look at this bloody garment, hakerna, do you recognize it? Now what had happened with Yehuda was after he had been with her, Tamar became pregnant. And well, if she was bound by levirate marriage to marry Shelah, whom Yehuda had no intention of giving her to, so then she was committing an act of adultery. And so Yehuda pronounced the sentence of burning, Hotziuha v'tisaref, bring her out and let her be burnt. And then she sends the staff and the ring and the string, the ptil, to Yehuda discreetly, so as not to embarrass him. But she says to him, do you recognize these things? And she uses the same phrase, hakerna, do you recognize this? And that moment, Yehuda had a choice. And his choice was, do I persist in my deception and allow this woman to be killed together with the baby or babies, because it turns out she was pregnant with twins, to be killed in order to prevent myself from being shamed? Or do I publicly admit my guilt and take responsibility? Do I admit the truth that I deceived my father and this is coming back to rebuke me? Tamar's rebuke was very powerful. And do I take responsibility for it? And Yehuda then has his two words, the two words that gained for him the future kingdom of the nation of Israel. And the two words were tzadakah mimeni. She is more righteous than I. Because of those two words of understanding and accepting the truth and taking responsibility, Yehuda now became the progenitor of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. And because he spared Tamar's life, and with that, the twins, the older one would be the ancestor of the Mashiach. Because of that, the nation of Israel would have its Redeemer. Very important. That is the qualification of a leader, someone who accepts the truth and takes responsibility for it. Now, this little process, of levirate marriage is called Yibum in the Torah. But in the book of Ruth, where we have a similar case of Yibum, among the descendants of Yehuda, Boaz, who is a descendant of Yehuda, will have a levirate marriage with Ruth, whose husband died, and her brother-in-law also died without children, so she had no one left. And when she comes back with Naomi, so there's a relative, Boaz, who can also be the one to do the levirate marriage. But it's not called Yibum in the book of Ruth, it's called Geulah, redemption, and that's by intention. It's not just redeeming the name of the family, it's actually redeeming the Jewish people, because from that redemption would be born the lineage of King David straight down through the Mashiach. This is a very appropriate name, redemption. Why? Because what is Yibum? Yibum is an indirect arrival at the desired result. In ideal terms, the first husband whom the woman married would have had kids, and you wouldn't have needed a Yibum. But a Yibum is when things went wrong, things went off the tracks, and then you have to get back onto the tracks. And therefore the Yibum is performed. And that, I think, is a perfect metaphor for the redemption. Because sometimes things get off the tracks. People make mistakes. Yehuda made a mistake, and the brothers, by selling Joseph, and that mistake eventually led to the Bnei Israel having to go down to Egypt, where they would become slaves. So it got off the tracks. But God works his miracles and arranges things that each little peg is in its proper place, and things will eventually come back around to bring the full redemption. And so too it is with us. You know, we may have thought that the moment we founded a state that everything was going to go smoothly. Well, it didn't go smoothly. We've had some wars in the meantime. So it's going in the indirect way. But Yibum is Geulah. And it may not have been the ideal way, but that will be God's will. There will be redemption, and there will be the light of the Mashiach eventually shining. And it's coming closer every single day. As the prophet Eliyahu said when he was asked, when is the Mashiach going to come? He said, Hayom, today, im bekolo tishmau, if we listen to God's word. The more we do to bring ourselves back on the track, the closer the redemption will be. And that is the lesson of Yibum, and that is the lesson of Geulah. And the lesson of leadership is to understand what the truth is and to take responsibility, to do our best to bring things back onto that track towards redemption. A blessed festival of lights to you all. A happy Chanukah.